derby and one of the most famous athletes in history, Muhammad Ali. It's also a town with a history of racial conflict and police brutality. In March of 2020, the shooting death of a young woman by Louisville police would spark public outrage as her name became a rallying cry for justice. Louisville is one of America's oldest cities. It was founded in 1778 by Major George Rogers Clark, who helped establish a fort along the Ohio River. Its strategic location was attractive to settlers moving west in search of new opportunities.
The Ohio River was one of the main thoroughfares for travel at that point in those days. It became a hub for merchandise. Later on, it became an industrial city with manufacturing, and then whiskey, the liquor industry, became important.
Thanks to Louisville's fertile soil, corn became a major crop, paving the way for what would become known as Kentucky's liquid gold.
Kentucky is the place where bourbon is made. I mean, nobody makes bourbon as well as Kentucky. And so it's sold all over the world. Most of the money in the city generated by the sale of bourbon. When we wanted to bring back our downtown, what did they do? They created Whiskey Row. Again, it's all about the distilled spirits.
But Louisville's growth and prosperity did not come without a dark side.
There's an industry, there's an institution that's built, the institution of slavery, that helps to build the wealth here in Louisville, Kentucky.
Louisville, Kentucky's history with slavery, unfortunately, is one that goes back to the beginning. We had two very large slave pens here in Kentucky. One of those slave pens was actually right on the corner from where our Louisville Cardinals play basketball. So you have a slave pen that was located right at that corner where millions of folks a year go see the Louisville Cardinals play, but I don't think many people think about that.
Despite emancipation in 1865, restrictive zoning laws were passed to keep Louisville's black citizens in segregated neighborhoods. Yet they still thrived.
One of the oldest African-American neighborhoods is called Smoketown. And that's where many of the families begin to build their homes and to build their families and do their best to become successful.
The reason it was called Smoketown was because of the industries in that area and the smokestacks. In its heyday, you had 3 movie houses. You had the most famous nightclubs and bars.
It was really wonderful, and you knew you could go have a fabulous meal on a Sunday and listen to jazz or listen to someone playing a horn, but it was a very creative, artistic area.
The West End had been decades ago known as the Harlem of the South.
Those communities were thriving even when I came along, only to be basically destroyed by urban renewal in the 60s.
Most of Louisville's black citizens were pushed to the west side of the city, creating a bitter division that remains to this day.
A line down the city divides kind of the West End from the downtown area. People call it the 9th Street Divide.
Everybody grows up here knowing that, the West End is predominantly black. The East End is more predominantly white. It looks newer. It's, there's all these, healthy grocery stores, farmers markets, but then you go right back under and all you see is gas stations and, just mini food marts. Death rates are higher in the West End than it is the East End because of the access to healthier options of food. The air quality is better in the East End.
Many feel that Louisville's stark racial divide has also created inequality in policing.
Louisville's policing has been very directed towards the west end of Louisville.
I want to say it's like over 50% of the city's budget is in policing. Black and brown folks in the city knew and have known that the policing has just been, uneven, to put it nicely. Black and brown folks have not been safe.
Because of that culture, because of the history behind that institution, I get nervous. I have PTSD. I'm stressed out when I see a police officer. I get concerned for my life. I get concerned for the people who are around me as well.
And in 2020, one police shooting would thrust the city into the national spotlight. It's a little after midnight on March 13th. 26-year-old Breonna Taylor and her boyfriend, 27-year-old Kenneth Walker, are at home watching a movie.
They went on a date night, and then they came back home, got comfy. They were watching Freedom Riders in bed. Breonna kind of dozed off. Kenneth was not fully asleep, but you're kind of super relaxed in bed, about to fall asleep type thing. And they hear a bang at the door. Kenneth grabs his gun. He's thinking it's someone trying to break in because it's just after midnight. They're not expecting anyone. The door busts open. Kenneth shoots. And then after that, it's a barrage of bullets from every direction.
But the intruders aren't robbers. They're Louisville police officers carrying out a search warrant. When the smoke clears, one officer is wounded and Breonna is lying dead in the hallway. Exactly what happened that night and why will remain a mystery for months to come. And when the truth comes out, it will spark a national debate about police use of deadly force on Black Americans. Breonna Taylor was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the oldest of two daughters, raised by a single mother.
Breonna comes from a very strong line of other Black people in her family. Her mother, Tamika Palmer, an incredible woman who has so much love, and you can just feel the love that she has for Breonna.
Breonna's mother relocated the family to Louisville in 2008, and Breonna made an immediate impact on her community.
She was that person. If she knew your name, if you had a moment with her, you were locked in forever. She cared about you. She was a loving person.
After graduating high school in 2011, Breonna attended the University of Kentucky. She left the school the following year to become an emergency medical technician.
Powerful women that worked in the medical field and loved helping ran deep in her family. Her aunts are in that field, her mother. So she kind of carried on their legacy.
It takes a type of person to, want to be in the medical field. Like, you have to have a passion to help people.
Breonna became friends with Kenneth Walker online, but in 2016, they took their relationship to the next level.
Breonna Taylor and Kenneth Walker remind me of Whitley and Dwayne from A Different World. I think Breonna kind of tried to play it off, like, oh no, we're just buddies. But she always had something there for him. They were the couple that built each other up. If one was doing well, the other was trying to match that or go above it, and then so forth. They were just always trying to climb, always making new goals. Speaking with Kenneth Walker's parents, they said Kenneth got himself together when he started dating Breonna Taylor. They said, he walked different. His swag changed. He was bragging about his credit score. He was a go-getter. Miss Walker always says that she couldn't picture a better woman for her son.
By 2020, the two were making big plans for their future.
She and Kenneth Walker were going to get married, and they were talking about having a family.
They had a baby name picked out already. Kenneth Walker had his mother's ring ready to give it to Breonna Taylor shortly.
She was following all the rules. She was doing all the right things. She was just, working her way up in life and really had a bright future ahead of her.
But now that future has been destroyed in a hail of gunfire.
How are we supposed to feel secure in our own homes knowing that anybody can just barge in, knowing the police can just barge in and, kill us like that?
Breonna Taylor's apartment is located on Springfield Drive in South Louisville. The area is normally peaceful, but just after midnight on March 13, 2020, residents bear witness to a violent police raid.
One neighbor described that she's looking out the window and she's hearing an officer outside her window saying, "Ram it, ram it, ram it." A SWAT vehicle rams through her gate. She's thinking there's some battle going on outside her apartment, not knowing what has just happened to her neighbor right next door. Minutes later, we have Kenneth Walker walking out, hands up. There's dogs right in front of him barking. He's just confused. He's saying, what did I do? What did I do? What's going on? She's dead. She's dead. She's in a dead.
The shooting initially draws little attention. That afternoon, the Louisville Police Department releases an official statement.
Early this morning, we had a critical incident involving one of our officers who was shot and another person at the scene who was killed.
Officers knocked on the door several times and announced their presence as police who were there with a search warrant. The officers forced entry into the exterior door and were immediately met by gunfire. Sergeant Mattingly sustained a gunshot wound and returned fire.
At first, the narrative was simple. Essentially just saying there was a drug race, suspect killed, that was it, point blank, period.
According to the report, the officers entered Breonna's apartment as part of an ongoing investigation. An investigation that involved one of Breonna's ex-boyfriends.
The authorities essentially were investigating Jamarcus Glover, who had a record for being involved in drugs, drug trafficking, ties to a trap house on the West Louisville side of the community. What brought them to Breonna Taylor's door is Breonna had a relationship with him in the past. That was essentially one of the main links they used to say, okay, assuming she must be connected with him.
Detectives obtained the search warrant based on evidence that Jamarcus was sending Breonna suspicious packages.
It was listed on the affidavit that was used on the warrant that these suspected packages were going to Breonna Taylor's home and they could have possibly had drugs in them.
That's what the justification was for this. And so they got a no-knock warrant because they said that they had some reasonable suspicion that that person would be there.
The warrant didn't require police to announce their presence, but the officers involved say they did anyway. When they stepped inside, Kenneth fired a shot, hitting Officer Mattingly. He and two other officers returned to fire.
If this is the entrance door, her bedroom's all the way back here at the end of the hallway. Kenneth, has his gun. Door busts open, he shoots and kind of tries to go in this bedroom. And I'm not sure if, Breonna didn't get down fast enough or whatnot, but she falls at the end of that hallway.
Breonna Taylor was struck, I believe, 6 times, 5 or 6 times.
Check that wrist, dude. Check the wrist.
Breonna died from her wounds at 12:48 a.m. By 1 a.m., Kenneth was arrested for the attempted murder of a police officer.
He's taken to police headquarters, he's questioned. He says he still has, blood and stuff on his shirt. And just start questioning right away about what happened.
Is she and her? Does anybody else live there?
He admits to shooting a police officer after he thought it was someone breaking in his home. He didn't know it was a police officer when he fired his gun.
She just fired off one.
Yeah, just one. That was just the warning. I don't know who's coming to this door. The door just got kicked out the hinges, so I'm scared.
There are a lot of situations when it's fight or flight. And the first thing you're gonna do is protect your home.
On Saturday, March 14th, Kenneth pleads not guilty to the charges. The following day, Breonna's name is finally released to the public. Louisville police consider the shooting justified, portraying the shooting as a drug bust gone bad. But Breonna's loved ones push back. They flood social media with messages about Breonna.
The only reason why any of this ever made news was because her family was relentless in making sure someone listened and someone did something about what happened to her.
It soon becomes evident there's much more to the story than initially reported.
If you look at the pictures from the site that day, the number of bullet strikes in the home is overwhelming. Bullets inside of drawers, that went through the wood. I mean, bullets everywhere.
A no-knock warrant gives police the authority to enter a suspect's home without warning. Their use, however, is often controversial.
They can just ram the door in because they don't want to give a criminal the opportunity to start bagging things up and throwing things away and getting rid of the evidence that they need in order to bring charges.
Of course, most times officers are assuming, it's drug dealers or someone that's a threat to society. When you're wrong, if you make a mistake and warrants or no-knock warrants, that is traumatizing.
In the weeks following the death of 26-year-old health worker Breonna Taylor, the story draws increasing media attention. Many credit Breonna's family for getting her story out.
What started to bring this story forward is the people who were involved finally being listened to, finally catching the ear of media saying, we don't have the whole story here.
COVID had just hit, and that was all that was basically taking up airspace at the time. The first, I would say, time widespread people start hearing about Breonna Taylor is around late April-ish, which is still a few weeks after it happened.
When I first heard about her and I heard that she was an EMT, I'm like, this is absolutely crazy. My heart went out to her.
I felt more connected to her considering she was a Black woman. I'm a young Black woman that lives here. She lived here. That could have been me. That could have been my sister. That could have been my auntie, my mother.
The shooting comes at a time when awareness about the use of deadly force by police is growing throughout the country.
Felt like every day, every week, there was another one. Hey, did you hear about the police killing? Which one? People we're just incredulous. How is this possibly happening?
Now Breonna's name has been added to the list of victims. In late April, her mother files a wrongful death suit. The family's civil rights attorney accuses police of trying to cover up the fact that the raid was a disaster, starting with the search warrant.
Former Detective Joshua James said that he verified with the U.S. Postal Inspector that suspected packages were going to Breonna Taylor's home. It's later learned that James never verified anything.
The Postal Service said they never verified that any packages were going to Breonna Taylor's home for Jamarcus Glover.
In addition to that, the reason why that stands out is if you look at the whiteboard, you have 2424 Elliott Avenue, all the officers and the team that's going to be handling that, as well as the other homes on Elliott Avenue and the other homes part of the raids that night. On Elliott Avenue, it says no knock. Breonna Taylor's address, above it, on that whiteboard, you'll see the word knock and announce. Kenneth Walker on the inside of the apartment says he never heard anyone announce. When I spoke with multiple neighbors as well, they said that night they didn't hear anyone announce, no one say police. And that creates this huge issue because it creates this blind wall of what could have happened, what did happen, and why it happened on March 13th.
By 2020, Black Lives Matter had grown from a hashtag into a powerful movement, and it quickly picks up on Breonna's shooting. But it will take another, even more explosive case to give Breonna's family hope for justice.
Man, y'all don't believe me. I'm not the kind of guy.
On May 25th, the nation watches in horror as cell phone video of George Floyd's death at the hands of Minneapolis police goes viral.
I can't see.
We were already in the midst of our own storm with what had happened with Breonna Taylor, and like so many things, was captured on video, cell phone video, of this man laying on the street saying that, "I can't breathe," and you hear him call for his mother. After the death of George Floyd, I think folks just said, all right, we got to do something here.
The widespread media coverage brings new attention to similar cases, including Breonna's. And on May 28th, the 911 call from Kenneth Walker is made public, raising even more questions about that night.
911 operator Harris, where is their emergency? I don't know what's happening. Somebody kicked in the door and shot my girlfriend.
When that 911 call was released, what it did was it put people in Breonna Taylor's apartment, because what we knew was that Kenneth Walker was charged for shooting at this police officer. And what we knew is that he's saying he didn't know his police officer. He thought it was just people breaking into the apartment.
It seems so clear to anybody who listens to it that, that what happened, how it went down, was not the way it was reported. He was terrified, and he shot in self-defense.
You could hear him talk about the fact that he didn't know if Breonna was okay.
Is she alert, able to talk to you? No, she's not. Breathe.
It was sad to hear. It was hard to hear.
In response, hundreds of outraged residents flood the streets in protest. Soon, violence erupts between protesters and police.
There were shots of people rocking, ambulances, the steps of the Hall of Justice were covered. It looked like a war zone in the city. I remember being out there, and there's tear gas going off, there's pepper balls being thrown.
But this is only the beginning.
It was like, I have to do something. Like, it caused you to want to do something about it.
The fire had been ignited.
May 28th showed the city, the country, the world that Louisville and the people who live here were not playing when they said they want change and they want answers, and that they want it now.
Following the murder of George Floyd, protests break out across the country. The words, "I can't breathe," become a battle cry for social change. But in Louisville, the crowds are chanting for Breonna Taylor.
Say her name, Breonna Taylor. Say her name, Breonna Taylor. That's what you heard every night, over and over again.
Folks in the street just wanted to, remind everyone why we were there, and that's because Breonna Taylor was murdered.
On Monday, June 1st, another name joins the list of those shot and killed by law enforcement. 53-year-old David McAtee.
David McAtee, or Yaya, as he's often called in the community, had a barbecue place. He's really a mainstay in the community. And so he was out there, he was grilling. It was late at night, and there were people there. It was at the very beginning of the protest. Technically, there was a curfew, but where he was is significantly removed from the center of town. The National Guard showed up and may have issued a warning or two, and then boom, all of a sudden it was tear gas, which of course caused a panic. And they were also using tactics like what's called kettling, where they would cut off city streets. It was kind of like a maze down there.
According to the police, someone in the crowd fired shots at the guardsmen and officers, who then returned fire. A soldier's bullet hit McAtee in the chest, killing him.
There was absolutely no reason for the National Guard to have been there in the first place. Absolutely none. And there's certainly absolutely no reason to have been shooting into a crowd the way that they were. So, and now we have another community member who lost his life.
I think most of the community members were scared of this could easily happen again.
Less than 24 hours later, the mayor fires Louisville Police Chief David Conrad. The following month, the city council passes Breonna's Law, banning the use of no-knock warrants and requiring body cameras for any officer executing a search warrant.
All across the country now, some are feeling that no-knock warrants aren't worth the cost of life that often happens when they bust through that door.
In addition, the charges against Kenneth Walker are dropped, and the FBI announces they are opening their own investigation. But the controversy rages on. On June 5th, 2020, the day that would have been Breonna's 27th birthday, Louisville sees its biggest demonstration yet. Thousands of protesters converge on Jefferson Square Park.
So you have, people in the Black community coming together, people from all communities coming together, occupying this space, providing water, providing food, snacks, providing sign-ups to, join the organization, to stay in contact about the next march and ways to protest that are safe.
Louisville is not alone in honoring Breonna. Birthday memorials are held in cities across America and other parts of the world. Celebrities such as Beyoncé and Oprah Winfrey add their voices to the movement. And by midsummer, a petition to charge the officers involved in Breonna's death has gathered 10 million signatures. Jefferson Square Park has also been given a new name.
They decided to call it Injustice Square after the death of Breonna Taylor. And there was never a time of day, morning, noon, or night, that it was not filled with people. We saw hundreds, if not thousands, marching every night, every day, every night. You knew that people were going to be out and continuing to protest. This continued for months and months and months.
The folks at the center of the protest community here in Louisville didn't let it die. This incredible memorial popped up from community artists giving their love and time and honor to Breonna and then ultimately to other victims of police violence.
After 3 months, however, there is still no official response, and tensions are on the rise.
Who in here is a Black woman? You know what I mean? Like, who out here is a Black woman? Raise your hand. It made it real because it's not just Breonna Taylor's life, but am I next? Is it my life next?
George Floyd's murder showed how important video evidence can be in holding officers accountable for their actions. But should we have to rely on private citizens with cell phones to provide that evidence?
A lot of sort of police reform has been talking about wanting to make sure that police body cams and dash cams are in place and are running. I'm not particularly sure that that's going to make a whole lot of difference. It seems like if police still feel that they can act with impunity, it doesn't even matter what gets caught on camera. They're still going to do what they do.
The protest and newly named Injustice Square are entering their 4th month when the Louisville Police Department finally issues a report on the shots fired in Breonna Taylor's apartment.
The actual report that was filed was fairly minuscule and didn't really sort of tell the whole story about what happened that night.
LMPD is just known to do some shady things. They have had history of trying to, hide things, shove things under the rug.
Frankly, every person of color in Louisville already kind of knew the narrative about LMPD. This was obviously not the first time that they had done something like this, or disregarded people's rights, or frankly killed people that should not, did not commit a crime.
A grand jury is impaneled to decide whether any of the officers involved will face criminal charges.
The grand jury heard the testimony. They voted on the charges that they were presented with.
So we're watching everything kind of come to a head now. We're waiting to see what the fallout from that will be.
On September 23rd, the jury renders its verdict.
Only one of the 3 officers even had a charge levied against him.
Brett Hankinson has been fired, and he is going to trial, but not for shooting Breonna Taylor, for shooting into haphazardly other apartments.
The other 2 continue to be, our police officers in the LMPD. That honestly was a huge blow to the community, just to know that, yet again, no one was going to be held responsible for this killing.
The reaction on social media is fierce. Within hours, protesters once again flood the streets of Louisville.
The outcome of the grand jury decision was not what the thousands of people who had been protesting for months and months expected at all. Hearing Attorney General Daniel Cameron come out and publicly say that only Officer Brett Hankinson was going to be charged for shooting the walls in the apartment spoke volumes to the community.
Absolutely no one has been charged for any bullets that actually entered Breonna Taylor's body.
What that said to everyone marching, to everyone crying, to everyone who really felt now was the time for change was that these walls and everything else is more valuable than a black life.
Once again, the protests escalate into violence. In the chaos, 2 officers are shot. In an attempt to restore peace, Kentucky Governor Amy Beshear asked his Attorney General to release the details of the grand jury proceedings. In taped interviews, officers Mattingly and Hankinson both testify that they knocked on Breonna's door and announced themselves prior to entering.
It probably lasted between 45 seconds and a minute, banging on the door.
And this went on for probably 30, 45 seconds of banging and announcing, knocking and announcing.
Another key neighbor or witness is a gentleman upstairs, essentially right above Breonna. And when I spoke with him, he said he did not hear anything. But then we come to the grand jury, and those documents come out. They say that that neighbor did say he heard someone knock and announce after he said no.
Jurors also saw an interview with Detective Cosgrove, who fired the shot that killed Breonna.
At the same time I'm seeing these flashes, I know that John Mattingly is at my feet. I'm also not hearing anything. It is completely mute.
The evidence is intended to prove that the jury's ruling was correct. However, following the release of information, 3 of the jurors speak out against the Attorney General.
Some grand jurors have charged that he bungled and did not present everything that he could have to the grand jury.
What the grand juror said happened is that in that room, they would ask questions, hey, can we charge so-and-so officer for this? Or can we see this evidence? And they said Daniel Cameron and his team would say, no, we'll circle back to that. And they never would circle back. Or they would say, no, that's not important. And they said that Daniel Cameron and his team essentially said, we're only interested in wanton endangerment because that's all we think can stick. The juror said we wanted to try, we wanted to hold them accountable. And it just didn't happen. That's what the insight they gave the community about what happens behind closed doors in the justice and legal system. And it was kind of something a lot of people of color knew, or they felt just watching all these cases happen, and what they feel is justice never unfold.
And even more fuel will be added to the fire when dramatic body cam footage is finally released.
Hey, she's down at the end of the hall.
After months of confusion and speculation, Breonna Taylor's family and their supporters are finally getting some answers. The unprecedented release of grand jury evidence, along with police audio and video recordings, capture the tragic events of March 13th as they unfolded.
From the moment that door is breached, there were hiccups, failures, mishaps. Essentially, everything that was supposed to happen in the planning didn't happen that night. The first person in line was supposed to have this shield. They're supposed to be basically protected from whatever was behind that door. They didn't have that shield. There was a certain line and order each person was supposed to be in so that they have all the clear line of vision for what's happening and so forth, and that was broken. The officers don't even step more than, I think they get in a few feet into Breonna's doorway before the shots go off. In the files, the officer said they saw a flash and they thought it was gunshots. There was also a TV on that was flashing in the bedroom and gunshots coming from the side. And we know now that Kenneth Walker, as he said from the beginning, only shot one shot. So we know those bullets weren't coming from Kenneth Walker's gun. Not only is Brett Hankerson firing through closed blinds in an apartment, his men are in there. For all he knew, he was putting his other fellow officers in danger. This whole thing happened less than a few minutes. I mean, it was door open, boom. And then boom, 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 like brrr, all over the place.
Put your hands up! Walk there!
One of the major aspects that set the tone for everything was seeing the footage, the audio, and hearing the tone after Breonna is killed. An officer asked him if he was shot, Kenneth saying no, and the officer saying, well, that's unfortunate.
There's somebody in there dead? Yeah, my girlfriend. Who was shooting at us?
Hearing that the police didn't even know that she was dead inside, hearing that they didn't send an EMT or EMS or help in there to help her, hearing the officers laugh and giggle. The whole tone came off as a lack of regard.
Ma'am, can you hear us? Old Metro Police Department.
The first thing is to get somebody to help her, right? And with her being an EMT, that was one of the things she would have done for somebody else. She didn't even get that same treatment at all.
Keep walking! Stop! Keep walking!
After the recordings are released, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland announces that the Justice Department is investigating police practices in Louisville, Kentucky.
The federal government feels that the actions of LMPD have been so heinous that it warrants an investigation to see if there are literally either policies on the books or practices that are not on the books, but that are essentially policies that are violating people's civil rights.
Now you have hope that will shed some light, and not only shed light, but bring about changes that will be needed and are needed in the police department.
The city of Louisville agrees to pay Breonna's family $12 million to settle the civil suit. As a part of the settlement, the city promises a slew of police reforms. Although no charges are filed, the officers involved are eventually disciplined.
Former Detective Joshua James was fired for lying on the warrant. Officer Mattingly was also fired, and Cosgrove was also fired.
May 28, 2021 marked the one-year anniversary of the protest in Louisville, and Justice Square filled with activists, just as it had every day since the protest began.
There were people from all walks of life who were there. You have people who are business persons, who are CEOs. You have artists. You have all types of people, teachers and kids, you know. You have children. I mean, it was very intergenerational and very intercultural and intracultural as well.
The main message was that Black Lives Matter. We're not just out in these streets just marching, just to be marching. Justice has not been served for anybody, and we're still going to make our voices heard.
Justice for Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and others. We continue to fight today's injustices.
That's what Louisville showed the world, is that if you want to change and move forward, everyone has to do something about it.
Although her life was taken too soon, Breonna Taylor continues to touch the lives of others in her community and throughout the world.
Breonna Taylor was definitely the heart, the soul, the core for so many people that she basically touched and impacted. And you can even see that past her death, just the reach that she has made with, you know, the soul that's been left behind.
We're going to try to keep her name alive. She deserves that. Her family deserves that. I just hope she's resting in peace right now.
Los Angeles, California is a magical city built on the hopes and dreams of people from all over the world. But as much as the glitz and glam of Tinseltown are intertwined into the fabric of the city, so is the LAPD. It's one of the most notorious police departments in the country, with a deep history of corruption and violence. And in 2013, the entire city is gripped in paralyzing fear as one of the LAPD's own highly trained officers goes rogue, igniting a deadly rampage that sends law enforcement scrambling to stop this trained assassin before the body count rises. Los Angeles, California is the second largest city in the United States. Its famous celebrities, bright lights, and sun-drenched beaches make it a popular destination for people from all over the world.
Los Angeles is a great place. A lot of great people. You got the beach, Dodger Stadium, basketball games, football games, arts. It's just a great cultural place to be.
The greater metropolitan area contains over 18 million people, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the San Gabriel Mountains.
Southern California is a bunch of highways that converge on this massive metropolis called Los Angeles that has these outskirts, which are also cities themselves.
And since the 1900s, this expansive city has also been home to one of the largest Black populations in the country.
It wasn't uncommon for Black folks to come to Los Angeles because it offered a better opportunity than what they could have faced in the South. Everything south of the Santa Monica Freeway seemed to be kind of the dividing line. That's where Black folks were. That's South Central. Before, South Central seemed to have a negative connotation. What I grew up seeing was everybody, you know, when white flight took over, right? And I'm a little girl, so I'm not understanding what that means. But what I did know is that eventually everybody on my block was Black. Everybody within proximity, you know, north, south, east, and west of the street that I grew up in were Black families, people who owned their homes, who were proud to be homeowners, who spent an inordinate amount of time making sure that their property looked a certain way. You know, there was a sense of pride in all of that.
But even on the West Coast, Black citizens couldn't escape racism and discrimination, exemplified by the treatment they often received from the city's own LAPD.
Los Angeles Police Department is known for its racism, is known for targeting Black folk. And that went on and continues to go on. It was really bad in the 80s. We see instances daily of officers getting involved in something that's untoward in the community. Young white officers who are heavy-handed, who are what I call drunk with power in Black communities. Those people have always existed. But when you listen and you hear who's involved today that made national news, you see that they have a record and they have a history. And it's generally that small segment of knuckleheads on the police department, just like that small segment of knuckleheads in the community that are engaging in criminality. 10% of the community commits crime. So let's just say 10% of the police officers are knuckleheads. And the department knows who they are. They know who the bad apples are. They choose, for whatever reason, I think because police chiefs have an obligation and onus to protect the organism, the department, and sometimes they protect an errant officer. And so we hear those names over and over and over.
Police officers always consider themselves as hunters of men. Hunters know where the best place is to go and hunt. The Black community is the best place. It's because you can justify it. You have people with guns, high crime rate, and if you get into a shooting, nothing will happen. People who want to be aggressive, live that life like they see on television, get into shootings, they all come to South LA.
They were planting guns on people. They were planting drugs on people. They were keeping the money, the drug money that they were finding. There were some officers who were engaging in other types of business, right, out in the streets in addition to enforcing the law. So it was kind of like the Wild Wild West a little bit. If you were Black, it wasn't fun. You could be walking on the street and a cop could just stop you, search you, and haul you off to jail for no reason.
So what they're doing is they're preparing the people in the neighborhood that, yeah, you're going to get stopped, you're going to get your rights violated, but it's just all part of the war.
Basically, they just had carte blanche to do whatever to whomever.
The department's most publicized acts of police brutality resulted in the 1965 Watts Rebellion and the Rodney King riots in 1992.
And when I saw the Rodney King incident, I was like, oh my God, that's horrible. That's awful. I didn't know police officers did that. A couple months after that, I transferred to Southwest Division, which is in South LA. And on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, the Rodney King beating was probably a 3 compared to what I saw once I transferred over to South LA. It was nothing. And it happened on a nightly basis. People getting beat by police officers, batons, flashlights, brain matter coming out of their head. And it was all entertainment, for most of the officers. And so those are the things that I saw, and it happened very quickly.
The actions of the LAPD would leave horrific scars throughout the Black community for decades to come.
People are still afraid of the LAPD. It's still the same. It's not going to change. There's some officers who will always find a way to go around any changes, any new laws. And that fear is still there. It has not changed. Not in the Black community.
In 2013, the LAPD would find itself engaged in a violent and bloody conflict once again. But this time, they would be the target. And the frightening and deadly retribution would come at the hands of one of their own. It begins on February 3rd, 2013, 40 miles south of Los Angeles, in the city of Irvine.
It's a very quiet suburban area. Irvine, Orange County in general, is where a lot of people escape the concrete jungle of Los Angeles and they go to Irvine to retire, to raise kids, and have a nice neighborhood.
It's Super Bowl Sunday, but while most people are enjoying the game, Irvine police are responding to an emergency call.
A resident of a condominium is going out to his vehicle, which is at the top of a parking deck. He's about to approach his car. He sees that there are 2 people slumped over in their vehicle. He immediately realizes that something isn't right, and he calls the police. When the police arrive, they discover that these two people who are in their vehicle have been shot. There is a female wearing a blue dress, and she's on the passenger seat. They also find a black male, and he is in the driver's seat, and he's also slumped over.
At first, the scene has all the hallmarks of a robbery gone wrong. But as detectives take a closer look, one thing becomes clear. If robbery was the motive, the killer appears to have walked away empty-handed.
They notice that the female is wearing a huge diamond ring on her finger.
Two people found dead and there's nothing taken. It screams this is personal. This means something. It's not your typical Southern California robbery.
Outside the vehicle, detectives find even more evidence that does not add up to a robbery.
If it was just a random shooting, you'd shoot someone maybe once or twice. In this particular case, there were 14 shots fired. It was clear that whoever shot them wanted them dead because they didn't even see this coming.
It just appeared to be like an assassination.
Detectives identify the female victim as 28-year-old Monica Kwan. They learn the man in the driver's seat is her fiancé, 26-year-old Keith Lawrence.
Monica was a women's basketball coach for Cal State Fullerton, and Keith was a security guard at USC. Days before they were brutally murdered, they had been engaged. He basically told her, there's no one in this world who is better for me than you. You are my winning lottery ticket. And it was just such a beautiful thing. And to see this couple's life just be taken away from them was just so heartbreaking on so many levels. And her life was just beginning. Her and Keith's life were just beginning. You know, in the future, they had wedding plans. They had, they had to plan for potential children. And they really just had everything ahead of them. And everybody was super excited for them. And we don't even know, maybe they were going to go watch the Super Bowl that day with somebody. But they didn't even get a chance to do that.
Irvine is a quiet town. It's a peaceful town. And to have two people slain, ambushed, at the time it seemed so senseless.
While the scene investigation continues, police canvass the surrounding apartments looking for witnesses. But because the murder happened during the Super Bowl that night, detectives are met with a deafening silence.
It happened a little bit after 7 p.m. and it was like the height of the football game.
Door after door, detectives come up empty. No one they spoke to heard or saw anything. With little information to go on, they begin to build victimologies on Monica and Keith, hoping something in their backgrounds will lead to a motive.
Is it a coincidence that just 2 days prior, this couple had been engaged? Were there prior relationships that they had that could have caused a scorned lover to have a grudge against one or both of them?
Detectives find no evidence of any enemies or illicit affairs, no gambling debts or a history of drugs. But they do find that Monica's father, Randall Kwan, had once busted up gangs for the LAPD.
Randall Kwan was a Chinese-American police officer, and when he was a part of the LAPD, he was running a squad that was targeting Asian gangs.
Had Monica and Keith become the unfortunate collateral damage of a gang's revenge hit against her father? With few other leads, it's a connection Irvine detectives can't ignore.
As they're looking at Randall, it seems so far-fetched that if someone wants to target someone, that they would target their children. But at this point, officers don't want to close any doors.
There's a war on crime. There's a war on gangs. Everybody knows in wartime, you have collateral damage.
You know, it's one thing to go after the people that you don't like. It's a whole different story to go after their kids. That's like something the mafia would do. People like that who don't mess around, something you see in the movies.
And in a case worthy of a Hollywood blockbuster, there's a plot twist no one sees coming. Within hours of the murders, the killer will reveal himself to the world. And when he does, Southern California will descend into all-out chaos.
He has planned this, and not only did he plan this, he has a hit list.
At that point in time, and no one was safe as far as we were concerned.
He's out for blood. You have somebody who's trained to kill and who's willing to kill anybody to prove a point.
The typically quiet community of Irvine, California, has become the scene of a mysterious and especially brutal double homicide. The victims, Monica Kwan and her fiancé, Keith Lawrence, don't appear to have any enemies who wanted them dead. Investigators learn they might have been targeted for a different reason. Monica's father, Randall Kwan, and his past work as a gang detective with the LAPD.
If you know anything about gangs, you know that they are very vengeful and they might want to get revenge if Randall Kwan was behind a big takedown. And as police are looking at this, they start to wonder if maybe Randall was the emotional target and his daughter just happened to be collateral damage.
While detectives begin looking into Detective Kwan's old cases, a police agency 100 miles south of Irvine unwittingly becomes involved in the investigation as well. It started when an automotive worker was taking out some trash on February 4th, the day after the Irvine murders, when he spotted some discarded police gear in a dumpster and alerted the local authorities. The items include a ballistic vest, 2 AR-15 magazines, an LAPD uniform, and a field notebook with 2 police officers' names, Dorner and Evans. The officer calls into dispatch and runs both names.
They search Dorner, and that name doesn't come up in the system.
They do find information on Teresa Evans, however. She's a sergeant with the LAPD. They contact Evans, but she has no idea why her name would be associated with the discarded gear.
Then they mention the other name, which is Dorner, and she is like, yes, I do recognize that name. She tells them that he's basically bad news. He was fired from the LAPD.
Christopher Dorner had been fired from the LAPD for filing a false report in 2007. Evans wonders why his name is coming up now, a full 5 years after his termination. She finds her answer when she arrives for her shift later that night.
She overhears people talking about Randall Kwan, that he's not going to be coming into the office for a while because his daughter was just murdered. And Evans stops dead in her tracks. Randall Kwan had made the rank of captain, but once he finished with the LAPD, he became an attorney. Evans remembers that when Dorner was going to be fired during his Board of Rights hearing, Randall Kwan represented him in the hearing.
Evans contacts the detectives investigating the Kwan and Lawrence murders in Irvine and tells them what she knows about Dorner.
Teresa Evans had worked with Christopher Dorner years earlier. She was his training officer, so whenever they would go on patrols, they would go together, and she was kind of supervising him, making sure that he knew the ropes.
He's basically what we call a boot. He's just getting off probation.
But an incident in 2007 led to Dorner and Evans having a huge falling out.
There's an incident that happens in front of a hotel where Evans and Dorner are called to the scene, and there is a man who is there, and they're trying to tell him he has to keep it moving, and he is resisting. There's a scuffle between Dorner and this man, and Christopher Dorner takes this man to the ground. At that point, the story differs in what exactly happened. Christopher Dorner says that while this man was down on the ground, Officer Evans basically kicked him a few times.
Christopher Dorner felt it was not called for, it was unjust, it was excessive. So he reported it to his superior. He made a complaint against his training officer.
Sergeant Evans denies the allegations. The LAPD conducts an investigation, and their findings do not support Dorner's version of events. Following his Board of Rights hearing, Dorner is fired.
So the Los Angeles Police Department's, their take was, hey, this definitely did not happen. This guy is entirely making this up.
They found in favor of his sergeant and basically said that he had lied.
You know, that really set him off.
There was a statement of someone who was present at the Board of Rights. They said that Christopher Dorner was wound really tight. I mean, he was physically upset when he was fired, and he had to be escorted out.
He believed he was wrongfully terminated, and they were trying to destroy his life because he spoke out against his training officer. He crossed that thin blue line.
Christopher Dorner felt that his attorney, Randall Quan, cared more about protecting the LAPD and Teresa Evans than him, and that he never received a fair trial or fair representation.
Christopher Dorner, in his mind, the attorney that he hired was friends with everybody on the department. He really didn't want to represent him. He was just there taking his money. So Christopher Dorner felt that this attorney was a big reason that he couldn't get his job back.
He became more and more and more psychotic after that occurred, and more dangerous.
5 years had passed since Dorner's firing, and it seemed like he had quietly moved on with his life. But now, if their gut instincts are right, it appears that assumption couldn't be farther from the truth.
Once they put two and two together, that was who was probably the guy. It was like kicking a hornet's nest. They've hurt me, and I'm going to go after them, and I'm going to kill them, and worse than that, I'm going to kill their families. That's not about justice. That's about revenge.
He wanted his old attorney to feel what he felt.
Soon, all of Los Angeles and the world would know just how vengeful Christopher Dorner could be.
A day or two later, after these two individuals had been shot and killed, there was this publication on the internet of his manifesto, and then things just got crazier after that.
You have a U.S.-trained Navy, LAPD, golden boy turned into a serial killer and a terrorist. And yeah, terrifying, absolutely terrifying.
Christopher Dorner's termination from the LAPD occurred in 2007, and his appeal was denied in 2008. If he did have a vendetta against his former LAPD attorney, Randall Quan, why take it out on Quan's family?
To me, if you want someone to suffer, you can kill them, but then their suffering is over because they're dead. But if you kill a close family member or a loved one, then their suffering continues for the rest of their life.
Following the murders of Monica Quan and her fiancé, Keith Lawrence, detectives firmly believe that fired LAPD officer Christopher Dorner is behind the killings. They've since recovered surveillance footage of Dorner discarding police gear with his name in a dumpster 100 miles south of LA. They also tracked down a surveillance image of him at a hotel in Irvine just days before the murders.
There was a photo of him kind of staring up, and that flashed across the screen once they got a hold of it.
Records show that Dorner also has several guns registered in his name, including the same type used in the murders.
He was well-trained, well-armed, and that's scary.
But there's little about Dorner's history before the LAPD that suggests he would become a cold-blooded killer.
Christopher Dorner grew up in Southern California, I believe in the Cypress and La Palma area, which we would call the suburbs. And he had a relatively normal upbringing.
He seemed like, in a sense, your all-American good boy, like a very, very straight-laced human being.
He's very nice, very polite. He's a big guy. I'd say probably about 260, maybe 6'1". So he didn't really have to make too much noise for people to know that he was around.
He played football as a running back in college. Then, was in the Naval Reserve for many years. And then he joined the Los Angeles Police Department.
He was very sincere about the desire to be in law enforcement. It wasn't going to be just a, job to make money. He wanted to go the distance and have a career. He was anxious to go to patrol and then see what's out there and then promote and go be an investigator. That's what it seemed like that he wanted to do.
Christopher Dorner was all about integrity, honor, commitment, courage. Part of his moral fiber was doing what was right when no one was looking. Unfortunately for him, however, not everyone was like him. Christopher Dorner was taking notes in his mind about all the people who were doing wrong things when no one was looking.
I didn't see this coming like everybody else didn't see it coming.
Armed with warrants and heavy firepower, swarms of investigators descend on his last known address, but there's no sign of Dorner anywhere.
Christopher Dorner has become a ghost all over again.
His whereabouts now unknown, Dorner sends them a frightening and very public message from the shadows.
Anderson Cooper, the CNN host, received a package from Christopher Dorner. And the package contained a DVD of Dorner himself, a single post-it note with something to the effect of, "I did not lie," and coins with bullet holes in them. Talk about a very scary package to get, especially if you're a newscaster.
Dorner also outlines his deadly mission in a Facebook manifesto. It's addressed to America, and the subject is last resort.
He begins with saying to my friends, when you discover what I'm about to do, just realize that this was a necessary evil. I am done with the injustices that have occurred to me throughout my entire life.
Over and over again, he tells the story of being the victim of racism. And he tells it in such a way that nothing is ever done about it.
That moment when he was terminated from the job that Christopher Dorner believes that he was born to do, he in essence says, my life was over. That day I died. And from that moment on, he planned how he was going to basically get back his name. And for him, the necessary evil was committing violence.
Reading his manifesto, I just feel like he was just so hurt. He was just so disappointed. He couldn't take it anymore. But I think for him, the breaking point was being told he's a liar.
Dorner's manifesto makes it clear he intends to keep killing until the LAPD clears his name.
In this manifesto, it listed 40 law enforcement personnel that were targets of his that he was intending on killing potentially.
And he actually says, my high-value targets. And he lists them from people who were a part of his board of rights that caused him to be terminated. But not only them, but their family members. And now this is where we're getting to Monica and her fiance, Keith.
He wanted to kill that person's daughter to make him hurt like he was hurting.
After this, he also goes after white officers who victimize minorities. He talks about Black superior officers who victimize white officers, Latino officers who discriminate against their own kind. He even mentions lesbian officers who basically make men feel inferior. And the list goes on.
A lot of people get fired from their jobs. They don't go on killing sprees. I can't really speculate to what it was that pushed him over the edge. All that we know is that Christopher Dorner went over the edge.
Dorner's manifesto is a frightening blueprint of the violent bloodshed he fully intends to release throughout Los Angeles.
It was like kicking a hornet's nest. Like the entire Southern California region came to life. I remember San Bernardino, Los Angeles County, Orange County, all basically put out an APB on this guy.
But as the hunt for Dorner kicks into high gear, the officers chasing him can't help but wonder if they might be his next targets.
You have a cop who has a hit list, and he's armed to the teeth. He's already killed 2 people, and he is ready to kill more. It was the first time in my life I've ever seen the police scared.
Christopher Dorner's alarming manifesto has triggered an all-out panic, and the LAPD is under pressure to stop a killer they trained to protect and serve.
The manhunt for Christopher Dorner was unlike anything I had ever seen. I think a lot of Angelenos had ever seen.
To see someone that used to be a member of law enforcement go after, people in the Brotherhood, it's unnerving.
He's not just any chump with a gun. He's somebody who knows how to use it, and he has a hit list. He was ready to take on the police force at large.
He basically says, I am one step ahead of you. Whatever you think I'm going to do, I'm probably not going to do that. I'm going to do something else. And so he even kind of taunts the LAPD. They actually put out a team of protection for at least 30 officers that were named, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
In our city, our chief at the time came from LAPD. So we had a guard on his house. Dorner's sergeant lived in our city in Long Beach, and we had a guard on her house. The amount of diligence in law enforcement in this area was just off the scale. We're riding too deep. Everybody, even sergeants.
Fear sweeps through every inch of the city, and thousands of tips pour in.
The media was just going crazy with this story. My entire feed was just all of these people in awe that somebody was specifically targeting police officers. The story was everywhere. You couldn't escape it.
One caller says Dorner tried to steal his boat. Another says he saw Dorner near the Mexican border. There were also reported sightings as far away as Denver and Chicago. Law enforcement throughout Southern California scrambles to keep up.
This was the first time you actually had a guy with experience who had knowledge of the police department was actually hunting police officers. So they were absolutely terrified. And they knew that they probably only had one chance at it because the arsenal that he had and the skill that he had.
The whole amount of time that they couldn't find him, he could have gone east, he could have gone north, he could have driven into Mexico. He had the opportunity to do all that.
But in the early morning hours of February 7th, Dorner's truck is spotted in nearby Corona, California.
He didn't happen to Corona coincidentally. He was on a mission. The chairman of the Board of Rights lived in Corona. He had an axe to grind with the chairman of his Board of Rights, who ultimately found him guilty. And so he was headed to his house to deal with him and maybe his family.
A repo man stopped for fuel spots Dorner staking out the area.
Dorner actually sees the guy kind of staring a little bit too long.
As Dorner drives off, the repo man calls 911. Officers arrive just in time to give chase.
They take off behind him, but they don't have their sirens on. They're not trying to scare him off. They just want to see what his next steps are. But what they don't realize is that Christopher Dorner knows that they're following him, and he has set up an ambush on the off-ramp. So as the police cruiser is coming off the off-ramp, Christopher Dorner is waiting, and he riddles the police car with bullets.
Fortunately, none of the officers are killed, but Dorner escapes and heads due east.
If you were trying to run away from the situation, you would hop on the freeway and you would drive south. You wouldn't head east. And that's when you knew Christopher Dorner's here to stay.
He was headed towards Riverside, so all law enforcement was put on alert very quickly.
20 minutes after this incident with the police officers in Riverside, California, there is another police cruiser that stopped at a red light with 2 police officers inside of it. Unbeknownst to them, across the way, coming in the opposite direction and also stopped at the red light, is Christopher Dorner.
Once again, Dorner opens fire. This time, he doesn't miss.
And Mr. Dorner just walked up to the unit and ambushed them and shot both of them while they were in their vehicle, killing one and severely injuring the other. These officers had nothing to do with it. They weren't chasing Mr. Dorner. They were just truly innocent law enforcement victims.
It showed that he was serious because those shootings took place near the homes of LAPD officers who he named in his manifesto.
That kind of fed into this narrative of this killer cop who's just like hidden in plain sight. It's very scary.
Dorner has ambushed 4 officers within 20 minutes, and officials face a grim question. How many more will die before he can be stopped?
He's well trained, and he knows when to strike, how to strike, and carry out whatever he's going to be doing. We call him a domestic terrorist, which is what he was.
The police had to find him as quickly as possible and bring him to justice by whatever means necessary.
After Dorner kills one Riverside Sheriff's deputy and gravely injures another, Riverside County's District Attorney Paul Zellerbach puts himself and his family squarely within Dorner's crosshairs.
I went on national television when I filed the murder charges against Mr. Dorner and also said our office would be seeking the death penalty. Law enforcement, they felt that my life was at risk. Not only my life, but my family's life. Yeah, I put myself out there, and I understand the risk that goes with that, but my family didn't sign up for that. That was very concerning to me.
The search for Christopher Dorner has reached a fever pitch after the brazen attacks on 4 officers. But Dorner continues to evade police, with no sign of where or when he might strike next.
The LAPD had issued a $1 million bounty for Christopher Dorner. So you know that things are getting very serious when they are offering that much money.
The entire Southern California area, cops just went almost insane. It must have been like something out of the Purge movies, where you have cops deathly afraid for their lives, hunting a ghost who's hiding amongst the city.
The fear and paranoia spreading among law enforcement only adds to the chaos.
They were just randomly shooting at pickup trucks that they just assumed, was Christopher Dorner.
You didn't want to get pulled over. You didn't want to be mistaken for him. You didn't want to have the same kind of car he had.
In the mayhem of the manhunt, police opened fire on a truck driven by 2 women delivering newspapers. They also fire over 100 rounds into another truck driven by a white man just minutes later.
It showed that LAPD was terrified. They didn't have a control of the situation.
Every bald-headed black man went indoors because they did not want to run the risk of being mistaken for Christopher Dorner. He could be anywhere and everywhere all at the same time, and everybody was on edge.
At 8:30 a.m. on February 7th, several hours after the shooting in Riverside, Dorner's truck is found abandoned 50 miles away.
His pickup truck had been burned in a remote area up in the San Bernardino Mountains near Big Bear Lake.
San Bernardino is a little bit north of Riverside. It's a very mountainous area.
Unfortunately, they don't know if he has another vehicle, if he's on foot, if he's living on the land. So police officers, they bring in everything that they can. They bring in dogs to come hunt for Christopher Dorner. They bring in helicopters. They have foot patrols.
I think once he got up into that area, he's pretty much bought and paid for. I mean, you don't know the area as well as they do. Your chances of being able to walk out of there are not that good. Your chances of being able to drive out of there are 0.
Still, Dorner manages to elude police for another 3 days before there is another encounter.
On Sunday, February 10th, Jim and Karen Reynolds were taking care of some properties at Big Bear Lake. And as they happened upon one of their cabins, Karen unlocked the door and sees the most terrifying sight imaginable. Right there in the living room is Christopher Dorner with a weapon pointed at them. She knew exactly who he was because she had been watching the media coverage of this manhunt. And as soon as she walked in with her husband, she knew that she was probably going to die that day.
But to the couple's surprise, Dorner doesn't hurt them. After tying them up, he simply asked for their car keys.
It was pretty clear at that point that he wasn't just after anybody he could find. He was really adamant about killing people who were on his list.
After Dorner flees, the couple frees themselves and calls 911. Over the next few hours, Dorner plays a dangerous game of cat and mouse with police as they try to prevent him from getting off the mountain.
It is full-blown chaos. Police shooting Christopher Dorner shooting police. There are vehicles that have been crashed. There's carjackings, and it's clear that there is going to be more bloodshed on this mountain.
2 of the deputies involved in the manhunt stop to investigate one of the cabins on the mountain. What they don't know is that Christopher Dorner is hiding inside, waiting for a target, and he has the upper hand.
Right then, you hear gunshots. The first officers hit all over his body. I mean, it is a barrage of bullets. The second deputy was able to get out of the vehicle and stand behind the vehicle to take shelter. He was trying to call in radio support for a helicopter, specifically trying to pinpoint them to the exact cabin that Christopher Dorner was sitting in. He revealed his body just enough that Christopher Dorner took one shot and hit him right in the chest. He died almost immediately.
Moments later, backup arrives and the cabin is surrounded by dozens of highly trained SWAT officers. For Dorner, there appears to be no escape.
It becomes more dangerous if that's even possible. So they tried to call him out. Mr. Dorner was not responding to their requests to surrender or give himself up, and he was continuing to engage in the firefight.
It turns into a big SWAT scenario, and he's either going to come out or they're going to go in after him.
Whatever they needed to do to get him arrested or to get him to stop harming the public needed to happen, because to him this meant war.
You can tell they didn't want to take him alive. They wanted to kill him.
After 10 terrifying days, SWAT teams have cornered Christopher Dorner in a remote cabin on Big Bear Mountain. But he's not going down without a fight.
And they had an intense standoff. And law enforcement felt that they didn't have the upper hand. They were at a disadvantage, so they ordered the house to be burned.
They threw smoke bombs, and that didn't have much success initially. And so they went to a higher level pyrotechnic kind of bomb and fired those into the house, which ultimately caught the cabin on fire.
But Dorner seems to have no intention of being taken alive.
Shortly after the fire started, and then they heard one single gunshot.
Eventually, once the fire dies down, they're able to go into the cabin, and that's when they find a man lying in these ashes, and he has one gunshot wound to the head.
Through dental records, they were able to identify it 100% as Mr. Dorner, and a bullet in his head was self-inflicted.
Police also find Dorner's 9mm pistol in the burned ruins of the cabin. It's the same gun used to kill Monica Kwan and Keith Lawrence. The murder investigation and the city's nightmare is finally over.
It was a huge sigh of relief. It was sad that another deputy had to lose his life in that firefight, but at the same time, it was over. I was looking forward to prosecuting Mr. Dorner, personally. And I'm sure Orange County was, and San Bernardino County would as well. But, Mr. Dorner decided to end it in his own manner.
Delusions of grandeur combined with bad decisions got the best of him. It was really a unique, emergent blend of all of these different things that came together to create this particular monster.
But as the fear that gripped Los Angeles subsides, public opinion of Dorner's shooting spree becomes surprisingly split.
What was really, really interesting to see was half of the people that you would see were totally in favor of this guy, and the other half were just totally against him. And that wasn't always fitting with the neat political boxes that we put people in.
Many empathize with Dorner's fight against the LAPD and its history of racist law enforcement practices. Some even see him as a folk hero.
A lot of people looked at Christopher Dorner and the killings that happened as if it was a team sport. Here's who I'm rooting for. I had bad experiences with the police. I love this guy no matter what, even if he's going about it the worst way possible. Then there were other people who loved the police and they just couldn't stand Christopher Dorner. But I think for the majority of people, it created this conflict in you because these social issues mattered and they came to the surface in such a way that we hadn't seen since Rodney King.
What he did was not the right way. It was horrible. But what it did was it did open the eyes of the mainstream media and people in general.
I don't know very many Black police officers in the LAPD that don't have a story around racism within that department and things that have happened to them.
You see police beatings, you see people making allegations they were beat, and it just triggers you. You never get away from it. It starts to grow until one day, you snap.
In the years since Dorner's rampage, the LAPD continues to struggle with its public image. The legacy of fear and mistrust in communities of color will not easily be reversed.
Have we made some changes? Absolutely. But we still have a lot of the same problems going on. We still have unarmed folks being killed by the police. We still have Black folks being targeted by the police, being, randomly stopped and pulled over more than any other race.
And I believe that a lot of officers are mentally ill. Based on what they go through, they have these psychoses, and they need to have counseling, and there needs to be more done on that level. Dorner acted on his impulse, but that's something that law enforcement agencies need to address because there are a lot of ticking time bombs out there.